This is A Story of Sorts, the podcast mostly about bookish stuff, and I am your host, Karina Pereira. Hello everyone, and welcome to another season of A Story of Sorts. I am so happy to be doing this again, and I can't wait to show you all the things that I've been preparing in the last months. We kick off season 3 with an interview with Reyna Marder Gentin about changing career paths at 50, how she used her work knowledge on her 3 published books, and about writing what you know. Have a listen. Reyna, welcome to A Story of Sorts.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So I live in New York. I live with my husband, who I married shortly after high school. We've been married for 30 years, and we have 2 kids who are now out of the house.
Oh.
And that's really quite an amazing thing. Good and bad. And I practiced law for many years, almost 25 years before I started writing. I left my job in 2014 and I started writing kind of a little bit on a whim. Somebody invited me to go to a class at our local university, and I went with her. And yeah, so since then I've written, I'm about to have my 3rd book is coming out tomorrow. I've had a bunch of other, short stories, personal essays, all different things published. So yeah, it's been great.
And I'm really curious about that story. How does someone who has practiced law for almost 25 years decides to become a full-time writer?
So the law that I was doing for the most part was criminal appellate work, where we would represent people that had been convicted of a crime in New York, and they get one shot at one appeal to a higher court. So there was a lot of writing involved in the job, and honestly, a lot of creative writing. Like, it was sort of, you had to base your arguments on the law, of course, but but a lot of it was how you framed things and how you told the story about what happened to this person and what this person may or may not have done, in a way to try to engender some sympathy for them and to get the judges to think about giving them a second chance. So I feel like I was doing a lot of kind of persuasive, creative writing before I left the job. And then when I left, it was very much like I kind of was starting over. I was, I think, 48 when I left. And, when you find yourself at that point in your life, not really having a direction, it was frightening, but it was also kind of liberating. It was like, wow, luckily, I'm in a position where I didn't have to get a new job right away, and I could give myself the time to explore what else might be interesting to me. And as I say, I took this class with my friend. She invited me to go along, and it was a memoir class. And I thought that was crazy. Like, I knew I wasn't going to write a memoir, right? Like, I didn't have that sort of life to write a memoir. But it was really interesting. Like, I learned a lot about what memoir is and isn't, and it can really be sort of much more focused and much smaller scale in a certain way. And I did a lot of writing about different people in my life and different moments and chapters of my life. And I was able to kind of develop those characters afterwards into what turned out to be my first book. So yeah, it's been a great transition. I mean, it's very, very different, obviously. And there are, parts that are better than other parts, but I'd say overall it's been great.
Do you think that class with your friend was like the changing point? Do you think you would still have become a writer if you hadn't attended the class?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I really had no idea what I was going to do at all. And it was just kind of random that I went with her. It was kind of random that she asked me. I mean, we're kind of better friends now than we were 7 years ago. And I don't even know why it occurred to her to ask me if I wanted to go with her. So I kind of feel like there's a larger hand at play somewhere. But
tell us about your books. What do you write about?
So the first book was very much based on my own experiences in the public defender's office. I knew all the time that I was there that there were some good stories and that, I was hopeful that someday I would be able to take at least one of my cases and kind of follow it through in a fictional way, which is what I did. I had a case that involved a sexual assault, which I had reversed based on a error with the DNA evidence. And I was interested in sort of the story behind the story. Who was this guy? Had he really done these terrible things to this woman and to other women? Or was there more ambiguity? And, what could I do with his story? So the main character bears some resemblance to me in the book. She's, been doing this work for a while. She's a little bit burnt out. And then she gets assigned to represent this guy who she thinks may be innocent. And, it takes a romantic turn, which none of my clients, that part was not me at all. But it made, for good reading in the book. So that was the first book. The second book, I actually, again, another friend who I had met through these classes was encouraging me to take a class on writing for youth, writing for young people.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a book for middle grade students, which is sort of, 10 to 14, something like that, where the protagonist has undiagnosed dyslexia, and she's dealing with all the things that go along with that, the frustration and the lack of self-esteem and bullying and a lot of issues that go along with that. So that's been great. I mean, I'm proud of the book. I think it has a lot of good lessons to teach people that age about empathy and about resilience. I'm the issue here is that because of COVID, it came out in January of 2021, and
Mm-hmm.
all the schools here were closed at the time. The libraries were closed, bookstores. So it's just been hard to get a lot of traction. I'm starting to go to schools now, which is great. But even that, like I visited a school last week, and we had to do everything outside, and the kids were still masked, and it's just been difficult.
It's been tough for writers, I think, to publish books during a pandemic. I have interviewed a few people in which has been the case, but of course, the experience of publishing a book during a pandemic is not really the same.
No, it's not. I mean, it's just so hard to get out and about, and everything, everything is kind of shut down, and all these things on Zoom are fantastic. And in some ways, you reach people that you would not have reached before. But on the other hand, the actual selling of books on Zoom is not, it's not so easy. So that's been interesting. And my new book comes out now. It's also back to the law. The protagonist is a family court judge, and I spent my early years in family court. So it's a love story, but it revolves around this woman who's this family court judge and a guy that she's dating who's an internet blogger. So yeah, it's been fun. I mean, it's all been fun.
And a little bit also picking the more modern kind of stories as well, with the internet blogging and such.
Right, trying to get into the modern day.
What is the title of the books?
The first book is called Unreasonable Doubts.
Mm-hmm.
The second book is called My Name is Layla. That's the children's book. And the third book that's coming out is called Both Are True.
Yeah, and it comes out because this is published a little bit later. No problem. It comes out on the 5th of October, 2021, yes. Right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, so it will be already out. Exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
Oh, do you have anything planned for tomorrow for the release?
Not so much for tomorrow. I have a launch party coming up a few days after the release on the weekend, because I wanted to make it a time when friends could come. And we'll see. I mean, I'm desperately hoping it's not some kind of COVID super spreader event. We're going to be outside, and I'm doing my best to kind of keep it safe. And everybody's vaccinated, but somehow that's not really making much of a difference these days. But it should be fun. I hope it'll be fun.
I was going to ask you, in which ways has your work as a lawyer helped you as a writer? Because it kind of makes me think a little bit like how Agatha Christie used her knowledge as a nurse to with the poison. So I kind of feel that your knowledge as a lawyer helps a lot when it comes to research. Do you still have to do a lot of research for the books?
I had to do some research. I wanted to make sure, that I didn't get anything wrong. I did some regarding sentencing, things that I was not as familiar with, so that I didn't get things wrong. But I think in the bigger picture, my training really helped me with the writing. Like I think first of all, I think I'm very disciplined. I think that I understand that words matter, that you can't substitute one word for another word and it'll all be the same. I mean, that's not how lawyers think. And I think very much trying to look at things from different angles to, recognize that something may appear one way, but you have to look at all sides of the story to really understand what's going on. And I think I've tried to do that. I mean, in the new book, it's told from Jackie's perspective, that's the judge, and then also from Lou's perspective. So the chapters alternate. And, you really get a sense of what they're each thinking and, whether this is going to work out and whether, they need to abandon ship and go for something else. But it was interesting to write that way, just to try to get into their heads and also especially trying to write from a male perspective, which I had never really tried to do before. So
it must be interesting also to kind of pick up to people and decide what parts of the story or which kind of views they have of the same story.
Right. It was interesting. And they both had very different journeys to take also, which is kind of what I was interested in and why I made it dual perspective, because her thing is that she's kind of very controlling. She's a judge. She wants to make decisions and make things, fix the families that come in front of her. And that's kind of how she's approached her love life also. And he's much more kind of laid back, but also kind of not so great at committing. He's sort of on the other side of the spectrum. So, she has to learn how to step back a little bit and he needs to learn how to step up. So, it was interesting, like showing where they were at different points.
What was the most challenging book to write or to publish, or both? Can be both.
Yeah. So I think certainly the first book was the most challenging to publish. It was probably the easiest to write because it came out of my experience, and I was, very much, it was set in an office similar to the office that I worked in. A lot of the characters were similar to people that I knew. So that was probably easiest to write. But, figuring out the whole publishing thing and what the options were and, where I stood as a middle-aged person with no experience in this and very little social media presence, and how that was going to play out with agents and publishers, and working all that out was very difficult. I think once you do it once, it's a little easier. So the other books definitely were easier on the publishing side. And I would say on the writing, probably the middle grade was harder for me, because it was, I felt it was very important to get the right voice for it and to get back to that 14-year-old understanding of life. And, I'm way past that. So, it was hard. It was hard to get back into her head. I mean, I think it came out, I think it was good, but I think it took me back to a place that I hadn't, anticipated going back to. So.
You write for adults, but also middle graders. You write essays and short fiction. Do you have a favorite medium?
I mean, I think the novels are certainly the most exciting when when your book is coming out. There's nothing like that. It's also terrifying. You all of a sudden realize that people are going to be reading something that you've put kind of your whole heart into. And I myself feel very exposed. I think other people maybe feel more confident than I do. I feel I should say I feel very confident about the writing itself, but whether the story makes sense or whether, whether it's going to appeal to people, that's a little harder. I think with the new one, the advanced reaction that I've been getting from people that read it early is they seem to like it, but definitely they have trouble with some of the things that the characters do in the book. And and that's okay with me. Like they tell me, one person posted yesterday, like she wanted to strangle Lou. And I was like, okay, like if he evoked that level of emotion in you, like I think that's great. Like I know you don't have to love them. You just have to be interested in them. But
Yes.
But still it's hard to put it out there and to worry about what people are going to say. But I'd like to do more short stories. I mean, I think those are somehow more approachable. You don't feel like you're starting on an endeavor that's going to be, years in the making. So I don't know. I haven't really done it in a while, but I would like to.
What is it like to change your whole life at the age of 50?
Well, luckily, like the other factors in my life stayed the same. So it's not like really changing your whole life. It's just kind of changing part of your life. Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I mean, the whole idea of writing is very solitary in some ways. You're really kind of sitting with your own thoughts and usually in your own space. And I'm kind of an introvert, so for me, that doesn't bother me so much. But I do think you don't have to, but I've found that it's important to create a community around yourself because, when you're used to working in an office and having colleagues and, I must have had where I worked, there were maybe 40 attorneys and we had each other and we had the judges and we had other people to bounce things off of. And, when you get home and you're just writing, you don't really have that. So, I think it's been really important to create a community around myself and it's a slow process. It's not like, all of a sudden you have all these writing friends, you have some and then somebody introduces you to somebody else and it's, it takes time to build up and it takes time to understand who is going to play what role for you. Is somebody going to endorse my book? Is somebody going to give me a shout out somewhere? Is somebody going to listen to me when I've completely lost all confidence in what I'm doing? Like you have to know who's who and, who's going to play which role. And, that takes a while.
And is it this writing community, is this something that you managed to do with people like from your community as well? Or was it something that is more online?
I would say it's both. I mean, at the beginning, before all this COVID stuff, I was taking a lot of classes at this university. I took the first one with my friend, and the classes at this particular place are part of what they call the Writing Institute. So it's just adults taking classes. You pay money per class, and it's not a degree. You don't get any credit, anything like that. But I met a lot of people through that over, 5 or 6 years before this COVID. But then it's also is online. Like people will tell me, this woman's so nice. She helped me with my first book. You should talk to her. And I'll email her and then I'll end up, so are they my friends? I mean, I don't know if they're my friends, but they're, they're part of my community. Like I'd be happy to meet them someday. I hope that I do. I have one author who's coming to my launch party, I hope on Sunday, who I've never met in person, but she blurbed my book, the new book, and she's been very generous. And, I would love to get to know her, but, it's some of it is definitely online, Facebook groups, things like that. And then some of it is actually people that, so.
Do you have any tips for people who are at an impasse in their career and aren't sure what to do?
So I guess it's more just a matter of trying not to be afraid. And that's so hard. Like change is so hard. At least it is for me. I don't know. Maybe other people are a little better at it, but I think it's a lot of it is your attitude and being willing to do something for a while, which maybe will not be so successful at the beginning. I mean, I sent out, so many manuscripts of my first book before I figured out that, I'm going to go a different route. I ended up doing a hybrid publisher my first time around. I don't know if they have that where you are, but so I had to put in some money to it.
Yeah.
And, you'll meet people that say, never pay to be published, never pay. And you know what? It's like, what does that mean? Like, that's just not the way the world works anymore. And that's not the way these publishing houses work. There's so few big publishers anymore that, are going to take on new people and new people that are unproven and that don't have, all sorts of degrees and accolades and whatever. So, I mean, there's just, there's no point in getting held back by old notions of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And, I think that's a lot of it is just trying to get out there and not be afraid of taking a chance.
a lot of people are publishing independently as well.
Of course.
So, and sometimes it's just, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Gilbert, like the Eat, Pray, Love author, because basically she had to publish that book to be out in the world and then be able to publish anything. So she just
Right.
wrote for the masses. And sometimes you kind of need that. You need to put your work out there in
Right.
any way, in some way, to be able to kind of carry on doing your job and being known by others.
Right.
So yeah, and there are, of course, publishing is quite complicated also in the United States. And yeah, I've interviewed also people who published independently, and their books are very loved by readers.
Right. Which is what matters. I mean, sometimes you get down, it's not selling so many copies and whatever. And, but then you remember you got some note from someone saying, wow, this really meant something to me. I really related to this character or this story, and think, wow, that's pretty good. Like if you reach a few people, that's pretty good too. So
you have written an essay titled "You Know More Than You Think," and I'd love to hear more on your thoughts on this.
So I guess the point of that essay was that when you take your first writing class, everyone always says, write what you know. And I think it's really good advice for the most part, because, you're familiar with things. It's going to be easier for you. You'll be able to get into detail that other people might not be able to if it's not something that they know. I mean, my stuff about the law, both in my first book and in this new book, it's not detailed, like you're not reading a legal treatise, but I know who the people are. I know how the courtroom works. I understand what happens when the case is delayed. I understand, all sorts of things that you might not think about if you didn't know that. And, and I think that makes things easier. On the other side, there's writing what you don't know, because there's certainly, you can do research, you can figure things out. I didn't know really anything much about dyslexia when I wrote the middle grade book. And I felt like, you know what, I can go and learn that. It's not that hard. And, it allowed me to write it in a way that I've had any number of people who are dyslexic tell me that it was very relatable and it was very real. And I, got the details right and the feelings right. And, so certainly you can also write about what you don't know. And obviously you're going to do that if you're writing historical fiction or something that you really need to research a lot. So the point of the article was more like, there's a lot of stuff that you don't realize because emotions, right? What it's like to feel frustrated. What it's like to feel like your world is falling apart. Like a lot of stuff that may not be the nuts and bolts of the subject of what you're writing about. But if you can get to the emotions, that's like 3/4 of the battle, I think. So even with this book on dyslexia, like, I don't know, I'm not dyslexic. My kids are not dyslexic. But, I have memories of being a 14-year-old and feeling on the outside, or feeling, like I wasn't in the right class, or didn't have the right friends. Like, you know all those things. And so if you delve a little deeper into what you do know, you find that you actually know an awful lot.
You were talking about writing a memoir, and how sometimes you kind of wonder, okay, but what am I going to write? What's interesting about my life? And how there are like teachers who kind of teach you to write a memoir, and there's a lot of students who go, but I don't have any interesting story. And it's basically, yes, you do. You just don't realize it because it's happening to you.
Right.
But just tell it as if you're telling a friend, and kind of develop that, like kind of give yourself also the space to believe in the story that you have to tell.
Right, for sure. And also, I mean, especially with the memoir stuff, like, it's not about like, you discover the cure for cancer and you write your book about it. I mean, yes, if you do that, you will write a book. But, it's also about like, what went on, when your mother passed away, or what went on when you quit your job, or what, there's all sorts of smaller moments that are huge in the individual's life that may not seem like they're worthy of writing about, but they are, because if you can find a way to write about them that other people can find themselves in your words. I think that's really the goal. Like, it's not like their experience losing their mother is going to be exactly what yours was, but if you get to the core of it and the emotional element of it, they're going to recognize what you're talking about.
What are you working on at the moment?
So I just started something new, and I don't know where it's going to go. It's kind of more of a mother-daughter story, a story about a woman who's now 35, who feels like a lot of her failure to kind of launch in life is due to the way she was raised by her mother, and not in some big terrible abusive way or anything like that. Just in a way, she always felt that her mother was not really focused on her enough and didn't really care that much about what was going on with her. And she kind of gets to the point where she's going to try to work that out and figure out with her mother what went on. And then something happens to her mother and she's left unable to do so. So that's sort of the basic premise of it, and see where it goes from there. But really, I just started, so we'll see.
Do you know more or less when? Yeah, do you have plans for publishing? Any year?
No, I have nothing. No, really, honestly, I'm just starting. So,
but the idea is there. So
the idea is there. So that's good.
Where can people find you online?
So my website is reynamardergentin.com, and the books are all on Amazon, or I don't know. I'm not sure how to get them in other places, but I know they are in some foreign countries on Amazon. So.
It's the easiest way for people to find them.
It's the easiest way.
Because I'm in Europe, but I do think most of my listeners are in the USA. Because I also of course, I write for Book Riot, so that's also USA based.
Right.
So a lot of people will be able to find them there as well.
Okay, excellent.
And now this is the last question of the podcast. And I would like to ask you for an all-time favorite book and a book you would recommend right now. The hardest question, probably.
I know, and I'm really bad at the all-time favorite book question. Mostly not because I read a lot and I love a lot of books. I'm a little bit of one of those people. It's like, love the one you're with. Like the book I'm reading is always like the book I'm most involved in. So on that note, I just finished the Lily King book, one old one and one new one. I just read The Writers and Lovers, which I loved. And I read the one before, which Euphoria. It's about an anthropologist, 3 anthropologists. So I loved those books. An all-time favorite, I don't know. I loved all the Cormac McCarthy, that trilogy, all the Pretty Horses trilogy. I read all different things. So yeah, I'm not really good at the all-time favorite question.
That's it's curious because I usually tend to tell people, because I know how difficult it is. I've got asked also, what's your favorite books? Like that's impossible to say.
Right.
But a lot of people I do say, okay, just don't say 20, but you can say a few if that helps. Yeah. But I do know that it's a very unfair question, and it's a bit why I ask it.
Yeah. I hear you.
So we get a few recommendations in any case, especially new ones.
Right.
So Reyna, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
You can access today's show's notes via my pod page, which you can find along with all of my social media links at linktree/Carina Pereira. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting A Story of Sorts on Patreon. Patreon is a platform which allows you to contribute monthly to the podcast in exchange for extra content, such as early access to episodes, a shout out at the end of an episode and on Instagram, and choosing a theme for me to talk about on the podcast. You can become a patron at patreon.com/A Story of Sorts. Leaving a review would also be highly appreciated. Don't forget to subscribe to get a notification when the next episode hits. I'll talk to you then, and thank you for listening.